Hello, my beautiful mythical old souls, and a huge warm welcome back. Something you might want to know about the path of awakening. It's not all love and light. This week's show is with returning guest Daniel Ingram, who works to improve the global relationship of science, clinical practice, mental health, and the public to the phenomena that might be referred to in ways such as spiritual, meditative, energetic, mystical, psychedelic, and magical. We explore the challenges and pitfalls associated with spiritual awakening, particularly the dark nights of the soul that many seekers face on their path. This is ancient wisdom that in some modern Western spheres has been forgotten and is now being remembered, which you'll hear can be surprisingly controversial. And before we jump into all of that good stuff, if you are struggling with the challenges of walking your soul path in this crazy modern world, and you would benefit from guidance, support, and kinship, you can find out about our Academy of the Soul, Unio, and join us by hopping on over to bemythical.com/Unio or click the link in the description. And now back to this week's episode. Let's dive in. Hello, Daniel. A huge warm welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here. So, thank you so much for having me on. Thanks
Oh,
for all
my
your
pleasure
good work.
entirely. I don't know how long ago it was. It wasn't that long ago. I think this is our third episode together, I believe. I can't remember when the last time was, but we're back with, I think, kind of a whole new topic this time. And one I know that is, I wouldn't say dear to your heart, but certainly something that you've thought a lot about, spoken a lot about, experienced a lot. And it's this topic notion of the challenges and pitfalls and dark nights and life rupturing experiences that can show up along the path of awakening.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just start there. Why is this, and again, dear to your heart doesn't sound quite the right way of putting it, but why is this something that you have spent so much time and energy speaking about?
Well, first, my own life experiences, right? So these things often, would have these openings, energetic or perceptual or ontological or mystical, magical insights, whatever, these things. And then usually sometime thereafter, there would be something of a crash. There'd be some kind of a high and up, and whoa, wow, look at that. And then, oh, and then it would go deeper and it would hit deeper and it would hit, like, it's interesting when that side is shaking, but when this side starts to shake, people get, ooh, I don't know, or like, and then there are these phases of practice where we go into the underworld from the hero's journey, or we enter the dark night of the soul, or we go into the knowledge of the suffering, as Buddhism would call it. All the traditions have something like this, if you look at them and their maps. And that can be really hard, and it can be life disruptive, and we can become called out. We can become dissatisfied with partners, with jobs, with situations. And maybe those dissatisfactions were real and they just got amplified and brought to light. Or sometimes it can just create chaos where later on we go, what was I thinking? As we, find our lives skittering off in some surprising direction, particularly when we have like responsibilities like kids or aging parents or debt or a career or school or something. And so this, a lot of this happened to me where it would disrupt relationships and career and studies and things along the way. I did end up, with all kinds of letters after my name, as you can see here, but still, like, it was a strange thing. And then plenty of my friends and family members and people I was with in relationships with and people in my communities had the same kinds of trouble. And also the old books, these old texts from, 2000, 1500, whatever years ago, and plenty of others I've got on my shelf talk about these. And, I founded an online community around 2008 called the Dharma Underground and then the Dharma Overground. And, most of the people there are dealing with this stuff. So, 170,000 posts or whatever of people mostly dealing with the challenges, right? Because the benefits are cool, right? But people start reaching out when the hard stuff happens, when the stuff that really hits deep at their sense of self, or their issues, or their shadow sides, or weird energetics, or strange movements, or odd perceptual distortions, or whatever the, strange pains and bizarre sensations that can be very concerning to people,
Mm.
particularly people coming from traditions that just say, oh, you just get happier and more filled with light and love and all is well. Like, and then that's not the way
Mm.
the path can go. It can be very nonlinear and sometimes plunge down into the dark, strange, weird places, even in people who are very scrupulously trying to avoid those. And obviously that's an issue. And so I've, hung out a shingle in the late 90s somewhere and said, if you're having these weird, issues that you want to talk about, I'll be happy to talk with you about those for free. And I won't even take a donation. When you do that, I got to talk to thousands of people. And most of them wanted to talk about this, right? Some of them wanted to talk about the light and the love and the happiness and the openings and the healings and the wonderful stuff that can happen, which is all true and excellent. But most people, they reached out because they were having something hard going on, challenging, that was
Mm.
impacting their actual life and their sense of well-being and happiness. And I just got an email this morning from someone said, hey, haven't reached out to you in a while, but now my girlfriend, I talked to them about this stuff years ago, and now my girlfriend is having challenges after a very intensive retreat. And, would you be happy to talk with them? Sure. Okay. I can do that. So, then, and then the maps predict this stuff. So the maps of meditation, like there are these old maps, I keep pointing these books, like the stages of insight from Buddhism, for example, or, the tree of life from Kabbalah, or the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell, or ancient mythology, etc. There are lots of these. And, these are real effects in terms of like, they really impact people. They really are causal. And so I think talking about this is important. And I came up in a tradition of medical ethics. So the doctor side of me is like, hey, when
Mm.
you do a procedure, if something could go wrong, you say, hey, we're going to do this, but you could have this complication, or this thing could get infected, or this anesthesia could go wrong, or whatever. And it's considered normal to disclose that. Well, the meditation world doesn't do a lot of that. So somewhere in the early 90s, when I started writing my book, and was also very influenced by medical culture, and medical ethics, I of course put that in. Like the first parts of my book were like, hey, this can go horribly wrong. And also I'd had friends for whom it had gone horribly wrong, and family members for whom it had gone horribly wrong. And so I thought, you've got to warn people about this stuff in there with the promises. And also
Mm.
influenced by the likes of Jack Kornfield, who in his book, A Path with Heart, he talks about the challenging stages of the path and energetic things that can get weird, the promises and perils of the spiritual life. And in his book, A Path with Heart, which is very influential on me. And so that all came together to say, hey, we need to be talking about this stuff.
Mm. There's a number of different things that kind of immediately come to mind to ask you. So I'm trying to decide kind of which direction to go in first. One thing that comes to mind is there's, as you say, there's traditions where this has been very kind of like baked into the territory, like known, even if it's something that perhaps hasn't been spoken about as much in modern times.
Mm-hmm.
It is very much kind of understood and known as part of the tradition. And I think certainly my own experience, but I now understand from listening to people like you that this isn't just these kind of traditions. I My path originally started with something that you might describe as a bit more of like a sort of neo non-dual kind of teaching, where it just doesn't have that backdrop of, tradition and experience and like being able to map these things. And so that is completely missed out because it just has nowhere to pull on. And having experienced, some of the things you're talking about personally, and also with my own students over the years, I started to realize like, oh, there's so much missing. It's like there barely even is a map, let alone big parts of the map missing. And yet, as you're saying, even in the traditions that have this kind of ancient heritage and this knowing, in more kind of like modern times, it's not been something that's been spoken about enough. And yet, of course, you could see there was this gap and, started to fill it. In fact, I feel like I would like you to, if you can either quote from memory, which knowing you won't be surprised if you can do, or if you have your book handy, I would love to invite you to like actually read or name some of the ways you spoke about at the beginning of your book, because you were not pulling punches, like you were very direct.
Yeah, so for example, like in the Dark Knight section of my book, I have lines like, the Dark Knight can really fuck up your life. You know, that, like, it's pretty explicit. And you know, my book starts off, the first chapter is called The Foreword and Warning. Like, and it very explicitly says this could lead to, you know, profound perceptual and psychological instability and bad outcomes, you know, and that I've mentioned in my book that this stuff can drive people to suicide. You know, I unfortunately have had a few friends who have killed themselves as a result of this stuff, despite all the maps and warnings and attempts at support. Right. So like, even with all the technologies to help, that doesn't mean it's going to go okay. And so, you know, mentioning those things like that explicitly and saying, hey, this can go horribly, horribly wrong, as badly wrong as you can imagine anything going wrong, is baked into the ethics of the world I came from, again, particularly from medicine, where like, hey, there's a 1 in 100,000 chance that you'll have a fatal allergic reaction to this medicine. We list it on the bottle, even if it's very rare, if it's a known thing. And yeah, so, and I don't know if you want me to actually get my book down, but those are, you know, pretty much direct quotes. And if
No,
you,
I would like you to actually.
okay, hold on.
I feel like
Okay,
it's
let me
important.
take off
yeah.
my headphones and get a copy, but I'll do it. Hold on. All right, here we go. So we have the somewhat rare hardbound edition here. Unfortunately, no longer available, but it was fun. So let's see here. Forward and warning. Okay, here we go. So this is from page XXI in the forward and warning. This should be seen as another warning. This book and the path presented it are not for those who at this time find that they are unstable spiritual seekers. Meditation at the levels I'm about to describe requires a baseline level of material and mental stability. And with respect to the latter, not necessarily wealth or even a 401k, but ethically acquired requisites such as food and safe shelter. You must have your psychological trip vary together to be able to handle and integrate the intense techniques, side effects, and results that I'm about to discuss. In this book, I will explain in detail what is meant by have your psychological trip vary together, with the key requisite skills being an ability to identify difficult mind states when they arise and handle them with kindness and aplomb. Luckily, these are learnable skills. And then a little bit later, stated much more explicitly, people who do strong and intensive practice can hurt themselves and freak out, just as serious athletes can hurt their bodies when they take a misstep or push themselves beyond their limits. Just so serious mental athletes can strain their brains, minds, and nervous systems, and strained brains can sometimes function in very strange ways. To rewrite the operating system while it is still running doesn't always go well in the short term or occasionally the long term. Thus, while I will include nearly endless exhortations to find the depths of power and clarity you are capable of, I will also add numerous warnings about how to keep from frying yourself. By frying yourself, I mean explicitly severe mood instability and psychotic episodes, as well as other odd biological and energetic disturbances, with some practitioners occasionally ending up in inpatient psychiatric facilities for various periods of time. Exactly how much of this is nature, meaning their own inherent wiring or potential for mental pathology, and how much of this is nurture, meaning practicing hardcore meditation techniques in high doses, such as those presented here, and how much is related to other identified factors is a question that is still being worked out, just so that you are not in any way uninformed about the still developing state of the modern science as it applies to the art of intensive meditation. Yeah, and it goes on, but that's,
Yes.
that's pretty explicit, and it's right up in the front of it. And I don't know of any other meditation book that does this. And it's been doing this since the 90s when I first put the early digital versions of this book online a long time ago. So,
thank you. I'm really glad you did read that, because I think it, it does two things. One, shows that you were talking about it that explicitly right from the get-go, but also I think it's a kind of nice summary for everything we're talking about here. Like, it really can be that difficult, challenging, life disrupting. One thing I want to check your sense of is, do you see that for most people, they are going to experience something of that nature. The difference is whether there is the kind of foundation from which to experience it in a way where they're going to be able to, navigate through that, which is, part what this conversation's about, versus it just can be, at worst, really life disrupting, even, as you say, leading people to suicide. But do you feel that really for most of us, we're going to experience some of what you spoke about there?
So that's a good question. So in the same way that as an ER doctor, you think everybody is driving drunk while texting and every back surgery gets infected and every diabetic is drinking 2 gallons of Mountain Dew per day or whatever, like, because that's what you see in the ER.
Yeah.
In the same way, in my community, when people are reaching out and wanting to talk to me, it's almost the vast majority is because something is going wrong. So I admit that my sample is skewed. So I have a heart, but we did actually do a study on this that you can find in the journal Mindfulness that's authored by Julieta Galante and myself and a number of other people, Malcolm Wright, et cetera, and where we actually looked at this stuff in a population-based way, at first a rationalist community and then something called MTurk and then Qualtrics. These are these big public places where you can get a whole lot of people from across a wide range of demographics to fill out questionnaires. And it turns out this stuff is relatively common, and maybe 4% of general populations have had these things happen to them severely through this kind of stuff, like severe effects, and around 1% life-threateningly intense is what the data from that study shows, because it was really important for us to know, right? Because I didn't think my bias was, my sample set was anything like representative. Most of these people have had some challenges. So it looks like somewhere between 4 and 1% of the population. But among people in spiritual communities, I think it's much higher, right? Because they're people who have had some of these openings. And once you're on the path, not only are the highs likely to show up, but the lows and the weirds and the other strange things. So, and my guess is that your audience probably has a substantially higher percentage of people who have had something like this that was pretty challenging. So maybe it's 5% of the general population. That's a lot of people. Right? That's a lot of people. And moderately, it gets much higher than that. People had moderately intense effects from this. Suddenly you're talking, maybe a quarter or something.
And then what's your sense percentage-wise of people who are on the path? How many of those experience that?
Again, in my community, it seems to be nearly all of them, at least to some degree. Like, but this is not. So I'm the wrong person to ask, right? Like because again, people are not reaching out usually unless there's trouble. So I don't know for certain, but I think a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Even though your own pool is kind of somewhat biased or full of these fish, I still would imagine you would have seen.
I imagine maybe it's
outside of
25% of the global population. And I extrapolate that from like the number of people who have had major spiritual openings. If you ask them, like, have you ever had like the Gallup poll question or something like, have you ever had a major spiritual thing that felt like it pulled you outside of yourself and, into some other something? It's like 40% of people, like that's a lot. It's a lot of people. A lot of people have had this journey begin for them. They're on the path somewhere. They're having it causing effects in their life. And it's doing what it's doing. And part of what it does is show you the dark side. And part of what it does is show you your own dark sides. And part of what it does is sometimes to create dissatisfaction with materialist culture or the standard treadmills of, hedonia and seeking pleasure and possessions. That is part of what it does. And like it's been clearly documented to do that for thousands of years across all traditions. So there's seems to be something kind of
designed.
roughly perennial, like how many people have felt like, oh, the ordinary concerns of the world are not important to them. And now there's a higher or deeper or more profound, more important something, a lot, right? I mean, there's a where I am here in Alabama, there's like a Pentecostal church on nearly every corner, it seems. And these are people, who generally have had very powerful conversion experiences that brought them into an ecstatic worship situation, right? They're going to have this stuff, right? That's part of what's happening.
So it seems to me there's a number of different ways we can, or contexts through which we can experience these things. As I say, the way I sort of began this path was a much more kind of stripped down, minimalist, one can, just wake up. And there was just no context for any of this. And so when people were kind of thrown into, say, a depression, or
Mm-hmm.
like you say, like suddenly questioning their relationships, someone they've been, up until then seemingly happily married to for 20 years, it was almost a bit like it stopped working. This amazing thing that I kind of
Yeah.
went on a retreat, came back feeling high, and it was all
Mm-hmm.
amazing. It stopped working. What's wrong with me? And
Right.
there
That's
was
the
no
thing that people
context.
then internalize it and say, oh, maybe
Yes.
I'm not a good practitioner. Maybe I've been
Mm,
bad. I didn't follow the this. I didn't do the that. Have bad
mm,
karma or something, not
yes.
recognizing it's expected.
Mm, yes, exactly. So there's that kind of way of experiencing it. And then there's, I guess, and I know I've heard of, again, these aren't the traditions I've been part of, where people, I guess, are called into, I guess, how can I put this? It might be like something involving meditation, but they don't really understand it is part of something that's intended as a path of awakening. It's a bit like, oh, a meditation retreat. And so there just isn't, again, although it's a kind of a more ancient technology, the traditional aspect of it's missing. Therefore, the stuff we're talking about is also missing. And then there's people who are setting foot onto one of the more traditional paths that do have this, and yet there is still, how do you journey through all of this, even knowing it's going to happen? There is a kind of like way of navigating that. So pick from that cornucopia which strand you want to journey with.
Yeah, so I think a lot of this has to do with the way this came to the West, and that particularly, in the people who are likely to be listening to you and myself, this came to us through people who were very optimistic, like the hippies, right? They were
Mm-hmm.
very naive. It came to us through the promises of the new age and the age of Aquarius and a dawning of a new era in civilization. And saying that this could wreck your life or kill you or drive you crazy was just not that. It didn't sell, right? That's not going to
Yeah,
sell books.
buzzkill.
It's a buzzkill. It's not going to
Mm-hmm.
bring people to your retreat. It's
Mm-hmm.
not it doesn't work in a capitalist economy. Even there were not the structures in place that were there for risk mitigation in the way that there are in the clinical world, or the legal frameworks for handling the challenges. There wasn't this ethic of informed consent, of autonomy. And so a lot of the people even coming from these traditions, who may have even been exposed to some of the challenges, known them for themselves, or even known the old texts that talked about them, made some conscious political, economic, brand decisions to kind of edit some or sometimes all of that out. And that's not new, right? So everybody wants
Mm.
their tradition to be the best and brightest and shiniest and most awesome and happiest and most loving, kind, wonderful, peaceful, blissful, awakened, etc. I get it, sure, but that also is not honest a lot of the time. And so the economic and financial and pressures, if you want a retreat center that runs, are you going to say, hey, people go crazy here? Like, no. Like,
Mm.
because so then they're sort of making this parental or paternalistic decision. On balance, what we are doing is beneficial, so
Mm.
we're just going to make this decision en masse for the group. We're not going to tell you that
Yeah.
uh, um, anyway, is what I call in the book a warped culture of secrecy, but it's warped by
Mm.
a lot of economic and financial and social pressures.
Yes. I think there's also, and this might me being a little bit overly kind, let's say. But I would say there's some truth to this, that certainly in my experience, there's also often just a kind of immaturity that when people have had these profound opening experiences, and they may have come spontaneously or through a particular, stream of teaching, there can be this kind of like, oh, I'm now going to go out and share that, and not
Of
actually, they
course,
haven't yet experienced enough of what we're talking about to actually recognize like it is part and parcel of the path. And I think
I
that
totally
happens
get that.
particularly again in this isn't really the topic of the conversation, but my sense is particularly in the kind of, again, like neo non-dual space, that seems to be like almost I'm not going to say all of the teachers in that space are quite immature in their path, but I think possibly more than any other.
What also happened in spaces like mindfulness, where literally you could see
Mm,
mindfulness websites of major universities and saying, and it causes no side effects. Paying attention can't cause anything bad. It
yeah.
just makes you happier and more aware and more clear, even though they, some non-trivial portion of them knew the source material this was coming from and what paying very careful attention to thoughts not being you and things coming and going and, whatever can lead to, right? Because,
Mm,
a lot of the people who founded these things were steeped in the traditions and were aware of these as a conversation and made
mm,
political decisions that, okay, if we're going to scale this to the clinical mainstream, we cannot mention that. That doesn't work.
yeah.
And maybe it was a valuable strategic decision in a real politic world where you had to do something bad to do something bigger good. I get it, kinda. But the
Mm,
energetic literature, by the way, if you look at, like, there's a guy I work with, Pierce Salguero, and he looks at chi sickness, and like there's a huge literature on this in ancient Chinese
mm,
texts, for example, and medieval texts, where people are
yes.
talking about
Mm,
energetic effects gone wrong, or you don't have to spend too much time in like a Kundalini yoga class to talk to people who have had some very powerful openings and also some really weird stuff happen that wasn't
yeah.
always pleasant.
Yeah, completely. So, aside from kind of if you have got a choice not to step foot on this path, unless you kind of, as the warning at the beginning of your book says, unless you're in a place to do so, if you are in a place to do so and you do and start to experience some of these side effects, we could say, how might one better navigate them? I think knowing that that is sort of part and parcel is part of it for sure. I wish I had known those things before, but other than that, how can if we are aware that's going to happen, how can we better navigate our way through them?
Well, it's actually a huge topic, and I've done some other podcasts where I talk more in depth about what might be helpful here. But part of that first thing of normalization is so critical. Like, I literally think
Mm,
that's half of the conversation. It's not just you. This is the thing. This happens sometimes, not all the time. It's not required, but it is sometimes for a lot of people. A mild or moderate or occasionally extreme version of it is a part of the growth curve here.
mm,
And so that's the first thing. The second thing is saying, yeah, you're not alone, to connecting people to community of people who have enough practice to have gone through this and to have helped other people. So I think community helps tremendously. So normalization, community. Then there are some aesthetic questions. So um, the next question is, does the tradition you're coming from have the technologies, maps, remedies
mm,
built into it somewhere, even if they were hidden in some old book somewhere,
yeah.
something? Like, what does
Mm,
your tradition recommend? So people don't have to feel like they're then having to leave their community or be untrue to their
mm,
tradition or something, right? Because that can be very disruptive. Although sometimes that
yes.
is what happens, is people go, oh, now I found this new thing. But that can be challenging for friendships and family and relationships and stuff. And so then, those three things, and then trying to apply the remedies from within their tradition, if it's a tradition that has those available to them, which a lot of them do. Like, a lot of people are not aware of, like, all the Catholic mystical technologies that have been developed to help people with this
Mm,
stuff. For example, like, they grew up in a Catholic church that may have been very kind of dry, or not talk about the woo or deep end. But if you go looking, there's actually a lot of technology there. If you go looking through books like The Graces of Interior Prayer or The Dark Night of the Soul, or Interior Castle, some of those kinds of things. It's just one of many possible examples.
mm,
And so, and then if you can't find the stuff in your tradition that's working for you, what do you want to bring in? Because there's a ton of tech out there. And then this is a gigantic conversation. And that gigantic conversation of, like, what's all the stuff out there that could possibly be useful, could eventually trend us towards the thing we were talking about getting toward with the Emerge Wiki. And how do you bring in all of the work that so many people have done across so many millennia to help people with this?
mm. Yes. So do you want to go there now, or is there anything else you think is important to say before we go there?
Well, we had talked before this podcast about whether or not we were going to talk about this. And since it's an issue, So there is this trend sometimes of new people arriving on the scene and saying, we're the first main people to talk about this, to really look at this clearly, the challenges and the problems, and not always reference all the people who came before. I would advocate for all the people out there who are doing important work on this to remember and reference the conversations that came before you, as I go way out of my way to reference in MCTB, where in my section on the stages of insight and that whole chapter, I at the beginning say, hey, here's a bunch of other resources from a bunch of other traditions, not all of whom even agree with me on everything, that you can look at to understand where the conversation has been, where it is now, and where it's hopefully going. And just to remind everybody out there who's doing this work, reference the works that you drew from and the people you came from, even if the politics of them isn't always to your liking anyway. So, because not everybody always does the best job of that. And sometimes they can even do reverse and say, hey, like your book, like MCTB, didn't give warnings and sent people off skittering down the path, which is clearly not true. So
yes, and I think this is important. I have heard those, as far as I'm concerned, quite unfounded criticisms of your book, which is puzzling when, as soon as you just did, read a part of, right at the front of your book, it's there. And it's not necessarily that I want to focus on this, but I think there is something important that, like, yes, there is a lot of those warnings not happening in various, traditions and teachings and retreats. But I think it is important to recognize, like, one way or another, whether it be, like in your case, a warning at the beginning of your book, or people weaving it into, the beginning of a retreat. It doesn't mean it's not happening. It is happening and has been happening. And so I think it's important to recognize that, yes, there are examples. And again, my own path, like, there was none of that, because again, I just don't think anyone knew. But equally, I think there are times where perhaps the point isn't made as clearly as you do in your book. But, I think in most situations, maybe I'm being overly optimistic here, most people aren't entering a kind of like deep meditation retreat with no sense of what it could potentially lead to. So I think there is a bit of a personal responsibility taking as well. But yeah, I think it's far more nuanced than, no one saying anything and now suddenly people are pointing to that fact.
Right, because people have been warning about the dark stuff for, I can track it back at least 2,800 years. So
a while then.
Yeah. And the Buddha himself 2,500 years ago was like, truth number one that you will learn through this practice is suffering. Like, kind of famous for it, really. Like, first noble truth, like that is what you will discover from this path.
Beats your warning.
Right? It does, doesn't it? Pretty stout. Although I weave that in, right? Like, so that's also an important part of the book, right? So
yeah. It actually is making me laugh, because having I've kind of simultaneously, or sometimes at different parts of my life, kind of done more the kind of ascension path, and then other times more the shamanic path. And the shamanic path is the opposite. It's literally like, this is going to be absolute hell. You're going to probably wish you'd never set foot in this direction. It's going to bring up all your worst demons. You're going to meet actual demons. I mean, it's just so the opposite, which, I kind of quite blessed to have had that experience too. It's very different.
Good to be able to laugh about it, right? That's a sense of humor. Oh, I should mention things that help. A sense of humor is really important in there.
Yeah, but like you say, even no matter the tradition, it's a known thing. So shall we move into your work with Emerge Wiki? What's the intention behind that? And as someone who is, I guess the question actually is, like, who is the audience for that? Who would find this helpful?
Yeah, so the idea behind Emerge Wiki, we looked at Wikipedia and some of its editorial constraints and some of the ways that it worked. And we thought, we should build a wiki that kind of does what that does, but is very specialized for a particular task. And that particular task is to take the massive amount of previous source material, ancient, medieval, contemporary, hybrid, So, the stuff that's very syncretic and tries to put together a lot of different traditions, as well as sort of the pure traditions, if there is such a thing. And then have that as part of the material that then informs the clinical mainstream. So it's basically two collections. And the first collection is all the source material, referencing very, very broadly the conversation for thousands of years around the highs, lows, weirds, plateaus, healings, challenges, the good, the bad, the weird, all of that. And then bring that together in a second collection, which is carefully curated for what scales globally for clinicians, mental health practitioners, linguistically, conceptually, ontologically, epistemically, to cite our evidence quality, such that if a clinician had someone come to them that was experiencing these sorts of things, coming from a wide range of traditions, they could look here as a reference, and eventually figure out how to relate to the words they were using, the terms, the conceptual frameworks, the ontological frames, the epistemic frames, the cultural references, and then the phenomenology that is expected in that tradition. Because in the DSM-5 TR, which is the current major global manual of mental health, there's some other ones, and not every country uses it, but it influences everybody regardless of whether or not they want to admit it. So the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, that comes out of the American Psychiatry Association, or APA, it has these places in it where it says, hey, if what you're experiencing is considered normal in a tradition, but you're otherwise functional or doing okay, maybe that's not always mental illness. If you're seeing angels, but you're in an angel tradition, maybe that's okay. Like, maybe that's not mental illness. But the problem is nobody then wrote the phone book to explain to them, to the clinical mainstream, okay, what is considered normal in the traditions? So we are writing that phone book. So this is first the phone book to fill the gaps, to help the clinical world relate to what is considered normal or expected, or maybe not normal but understood. And then if it's considered not normal, what are all the things you could possibly do about it? Crowdsource in bulk. So again, the phone book of, not people even remember what phone books are anymore. Like, there's a generation who won't even know that means a really big book with small type and a lot of information. Right?
It's like, why would you need a phone book?
Right, exactly. So
you're going to have to find a better metaphor for this.
Exactly. I need to update I'm getting old. So, and then basically to help them understand what you might do about it, other than is crazy, needs meds, right? So that, or doesn't exist, which are kind of the two main clinical options at this point, or is something pathological, is purely mania, psychosis, schizotypal, weird, whatever. And so to help, and then to inform linguistics that scales globally, that is phenomenologically descriptive, that may be like, hey, I was seeing light in a Christian tradition, I was seeing light in a Hindu tradition. Maybe seeing light is just common pathway of concentration in the brain or whatever, doing what it does. And you can certainly give your, divine overlay. This is divine light and this is divine light, or whatever, but they're different divine lights, or the same divine light. I don't know. You get the idea. The point being that figuring out how the clinical and scientific mainstream can then relate to that in a way that crowdsources the wisdom of traditions to actionable things that you could actually tell people to do in specific cultural contexts, that hopefully will help people do better. Because again, this is not a new conversation. So that's the goal of the Emerge Wiki, and to help improve positive outcomes as well. Like, what are the opportunities for mental resilience and well-being in the positive psychology sense? What are the practices that people could do? The example I use all the time is a little bit extreme, but it's literally a question I've gotten a reasonable number of times, which is, hey, Daniel, should I do a 10-day intensive meditation retreat? Or should I take 5 grams of shrooms and a big hit of 5-MeO at the peak of it? What do you think? And unfortunately, I don't have great data to inform that, other than my own biases and, individual conversations and whatever experiences I might have had with either of those. But that's not really great science. So the question is, how can you bring together a common place where all the information related to these particular sorts of practical, life impacting questions can live in a way that the clinical mainstream can relate to, with good references of where the conversation came from? And then that will all eventually go into the LLM. So more and more, the big AIs, Claude, GPT, 4.0 or O1 preview, or Llama 3. Whatever it is, these big, large language models that are becoming what everyone is querying and are driving so much of the search engine technology and the synthesis technology, right? If you can create really high quality data that can then inform these to give the clinical mainstream, who increasingly is just going like where everyone else is going, to ask, hey, someone's coming in with this weird thing. What do I do about that? And to feed those the kind of information they need to really help improve outcomes in a way that scales and, you know, can work just as well in secular contexts as deeply religious countries and contexts.
Incredible. So I guess there's a point of, like, although this is primarily intended for clinicians, I guess there's a point at which it does filter down to practitioners as well,
Oh
because
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
The public, meditation teachers, spiritual guides, and facilitators, I think everyone will benefit from this. But we're very much building it to the doctoral level, right? Because the doctoral level of this stuff, like a doctoral level phenomenological understanding, a doctoral level sophisticated understanding of the traditions, a doctoral level understanding of the debates and the questions, a doctoral level understanding of what research has already been done, what new research needs to be done to inform real decisions. Like when someone comes in and their whole body is shaking, is that their kundalini opening? Or maybe they're having a seizure, or maybe their potassium or calcium have gotten totally out of whack because who knows what, right? Like, how do you sort that out, right? So not just assuming it's the one or the other, but really blending these so your differential diagnosis of what this could be is much more sophisticated and broad, again, with a doctoral level of understanding. And I think hopefully that will filter down through pop media and people synthesizing it to a much broader audience. And plenty of people, either directly or through the LLMs, hopefully will be able to understand the conversation. You know, they could have it summarized or translated for them. That's the amazing capacities of these things to, hey, say, you know, tell this, you know, read this website and tell it to me in a way that isn't designed for doctors, is designed for a layperson, right? Or, you know, so that's the amazing technologies. Or, you know, hey, my primary language is Hindi. Can you translate this to my language or whatever it is? So, or, you know, that's the amazing technologies that are rapidly scaling and becoming available to basically people everywhere, because some of these models are free.
Yeah.
So that, and really meeting the technological wave where it is, but you still need to do the hard manual work of giving it good data, giving it good recommendations where humans have had eyes on, where you've seen if it made sense to feed into those databases. And so that's the work we're doing now. And the Emerge Wiki, emergewiki.org, it's just launching this week, right? I still haven't even configured all the permissions and stuff. And it'll start small, but we need to build some of the scaffolding and frameworks. But it's a space to watch, it's a site to watch. And, you know, I'm on literally like a work retreat, kind of where I have very few meetings, very few other things I'm doing, and mostly just building this and still, you know, building up the configuration files and the permissions and all of that. But that's what I'm about now. Yeah. It's exciting.
Well, I'm honoured you made the time to have this conversation, and also how synchronistic it is, because I didn't know I was going to ask you something that linked to that. So that feels perfection.
Right. And so that's really building a really big tent, right? Because we were talking about how it could be easy to have a conversation about like whether my stuff was being appropriately referenced or credited for talking about the dark stuff or whatever. That's kind of the small, petty conversation to me, which is still important and I still care about. And it's obviously it's personal, right? But the much bigger conversation is, hey, let's build the very big tent, the broad thing that brings in tons of references, of which mine is a teeny drop in the ocean of useful information. And everybody can see where the conversation came from, going back thousands of years across tons of traditions and how things have fed into this. And then all of that can contribute to something useful, which is something that people can really relate to and use practically in clinical and non-clinical settings.
Every time we have a conversation, I have this moment of like, my goodness, it's like every time I think I have seen the extent that your mind can kind of think to, I realize like, oh no, it's bigger than that. It's like quite incredible to me that you're able to think in such a, like, it's such an expanse. It's yeah.
Well, I'm blessed with a really interesting friend circle, right? So this is actually what you're seeing in me is not Daniel originating all this stuff. It's a synthetic conversation that comes from facilitating community. So one of the things I found is very valuable is facilitate community of cool people, having smart, interesting, engaged, kind, thoughtful people in a dialogue. And then we all get to benefit from the synthesis of the cool things that emerge from the community. And so what you're seeing here is not, oh, Daniel's brain came up with all these super cool things. What you're seeing is cool communities talking to each other, bringing it together. How do we do this? How do we do this well? How do we do this ethically and properly in a good way? And then what do we want to build that will facilitate more community involvement, more crowdsourcing, more open source, more open science, more public dialogue, more disclosure, more access to good information to inform informed consent, doing good, avoiding harm, and scaling things globally, like the main pillars of medical ethics, which is what it all keeps coming back to for me, mostly.
Yes, and there's something interesting in I always know that when I say something like this, you always kind of want to attribute, what's going on here to everyone else as part of your network. But still,
Which is really true.
Is also true. I know it's true, but also your mind is doing that.
Okay.
We touched on, I believe we touched on this last time we spoke. And maybe the answer is already in what you've shared, in that this will kind of trickle down to, everyday practitioners. But I know that back when I was having experiences that, had me think I was losing my mind, it's not something I would have gone to the doctor about. Almost because of that, if that makes sense. The last thing I wanted to be told is, oh, yes, I've checked the symptoms and the answer comes back that you are going crazy. And so I intentionally didn't go to a doctor about those things. And some of that was, I think, almost subconscious. It wasn't necessarily like a thought out. It was just like, the last thing I'm going to do is that. It didn't even really enter my awareness as something to do. And so...
And that might have been really smart. It might have saved you needless pathologizing and medications that might have been harmful. Not that there aren't times when, in the face even of things I consider very, very spiritual, mystical, magical, et cetera, openings, sometimes there is a room for meds and stuff. Like things can get totally out of spec, and sometimes emergency stabilization does save lives. So I don't mean to, sometimes their SSRIs do help people, and the Abilify or Geodon or lithium or whatever, they put people on benzos sometimes, occasionally. They'll have a lot of concerns about benzos, but anyway, can help people. Right. So, but on the other hand, there's a lot of harm that is done because, again, in theory, doctoral level understanding, in practice, really not doctoral level understanding of this stuff. So then my whole project is how to get them to the place globally where that is part of board certification criteria. As I think we talked about in a previous episode, like how do you build in that so they really actually do have a top-notch, best of breed. They are highly sophisticated healers when it comes to this stuff, and not somewhat ignorant materialist harmers. I mean, you can still be a materialist and help people with this, but yeah, anyway.
Definitely. So it feels like in some ways you're addressing that kind of at the top, but also it will filter down to, the practitioners themselves in the ways that you're talking about, that we'll kind of ultimately all be accessing the same data, albeit in, whatever way is right for us. So that feels something so needed.
And I just want to give a shout out to Rick Archer of Buddha at the Gas Pump, who's also doing something like this. He's also become obsessed with LLMs and feeding them massive amounts of good data. So his compassion bot that he's building, you might go over to Buddha at the Gas Pump and check out the incredible work that he's doing with service space and those people. So like trying to figure out how to already build these LLMs, and I hope to collaborate a bunch with them. Like there's lots of other people who are thinking about this project, right? It's not just, again,
as often is the case.
It's a group effort. So,
is there anything we haven't spoken about?
No, that I think that's a good start.
Well, that was a quicker and easier than I think either of us anticipated.
Or we could go on. I mean, there's lots more to say. There's a lot to say, and part of this is going to be inviting people in to the conversation, right? Because like the brilliant thing about things like Wikipedia is, for all its flaws, it is the biggest single information source in the world, right? And and we hope to build the very ethical, very inclusive, very big tent version of that for these topics. And if people are interested, once we get some of the infrastructure built, if you've got a tradition, if you've got perspectives to share in a way that is with the goal, with the medical ethics goals that we have of high quality information to inform decisions that lead to good outcomes and avoid harm and scale, we'd be happy to, at some point when we get just a little more built, have you contribute.
Oh, wonderful. And did you say it's actually going live this week?
It is up. What is not up, it is still closed in terms of membership and people joining. We need to build some of the basic like structure of the site to then have people be able to feed into. So we've just got a little bit of scaffolding work that then this organic structure can self-organize on in a communal way. But the scaffolding work is still going to take, I don't know, probably another week or two at least.
Okay.
But
So by
close.
the time this
soon.
goes out, this episode goes out, it should be out.
Yeah, so September 23rd, we're talking today. So that gives people a reference, 2024.
So where can people find out more about all of your work? Because this is kind of like a piece of a much bigger pie or a tent in a much bigger campsite. Where can they find out all of that stuff?
You could go to integrateddaniel.info is my personal site. You could go to the EPRC, the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium, but the eprc.org, and find the EPRC, which is a now 290-person research consortium of people dedicated to this project of what skills to help people with the deep end globally. And you can go to the charity Emergence Benefactors, found at ebenefactors.org, which is the charity that I help run as a volunteer. Again, I think we mentioned in a previous episode, I do this all as a volunteer. I'm not making any money on this. I pay to play. As I say, I contribute to these projects out of my own pockets. If you want to contribute or know people who can contribute to these things, Emergence Benefactors is the 501c3 charity you can contribute to, and be very grateful for that. Thank you. Where else could you find those are the big places at the moment. And if you're looking for an interesting online community that talks about the stuff that has all the joys and complexities of an online community, you could go to the Dharma Overground, dharmaoverground.org.
Did you actually at the end of all that mention your book? I don't think you did.
And my book is found at Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, mctb.org, where you can find it for free. There's a free PDF, there's a free online version, and if you want a print copy, you can buy it from Eon Books, which I'm very grateful for, that they allow me to have free copies out there that is totally awesome. There's a free audiobook of it as well that we've got up now, so that you can find there, with a link to it on SoundCloud. So yeah, lots of free materials. And again, there's another one, firekasina.org, firekasina.org, where there's another free book and a lot of free online content about those sorts of deep end, very powerful, somewhat dangerous practices as well. So be careful. That is really the first talk I give on those retreats is, this is not safe. And I'm not kidding. So anyway.
I love the way you brought it back there. Thank you so much, Daniel. This has been such a joy to talk to you about, and we didn't end up quite as controversial as we thought we might, but I think we went where we needed to. So thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks. I really appreciate it. It's been delightful chatting, and I hope everybody out there in the audience gets something useful out of this. And if there's anything you found not helpful, let it go. Let it go. Find something somewhere else. Cool.
I very much hope you enjoyed watching that. And if you did and you're not already subscribed, then do hit that bell thingy and subscribe to automatically get each fresh new episode as it's released each week. If you'd like to find out more about the work we do at Be Mythical to guide and support old souls in this new world to live their own unique myth, do hop along to bemythical.com and you'll find out all the ways you can join us and go deeper with us on your own mythical journey. Lots of love for now. Mwah. See you again next week.